What's up, everybody? I'm testing out a new mic. I have a thought in my head that was inspired, as usual, by something that I come across online, and I wanted to talk about it. It's this whole idea of using lethal force for non-lethal intention. This is it's a nuanced conversation. There's a lot to it, and it's one that's been ongoing as far back as I have been on the internet. Whenever we see, whenever a civilian sees, a law enforcement officer or a responsibly armed civilian use a firearm um, for a kind of threat that is, how shall we put this? Basically, whenever there is a shooting where, it's an iffy call whether or not it was a good shoot, civilians would tend, like myself, I'm a civilian, by the way, would comment with something like, why didn't he just shoot him in the leg? And this is an interesting conversation whenever it pops up. Uh, First, we're kind of keyboard quarterbacking, right? Like, we weren't in that scenario, we were in that situation, we don't have the totality of information, but it's kind of interesting to talk about it. So that's all we're doing, right? We're not going to judge anybody because we weren't there. But if an officer or a responsibly armed civilian pulls out their gun, um, are they condemned to use it, right? Can you because a lot of people uh like to say, if you're going to draw your weapon, you should be prepared to use it. When it comes to the knife, people like to say things like the knife is meant to be felt, not seen. I do not buy into that. Like, this whole idea that the knife is meant to be felt, not seen, isn't a hard and fast rule. And in fact, I think it's a very dangerous mentality, particularly for martial artists to adopt that. Because the reality is, producing a lethal force weapon like a gun or a knife does serve as a potential to deter further escalation, right? That's just the reality of it. Is it also true that when you produce a lethal force option, you should be prepared to use it? I think that's also true. And that level of preparedness, for me, means that you're appropriately trained to use that or not to use it. So here's a question for you guys, right? Like, it's very easy to say, oh, why didn't he just shoot him in the leg? Um, and I can get into some of the nuanced bits of that conversation, right? Where the idea is to neutralize the threat, and then we can get into what does neutralization actually mean. Can neutralization also mean incapacitation? And can you incapacitate somebody without necessarily endangering their life or securing a quote death sentence, right? Shooting somebody in the leg might sound like a good idea, but that is where your femoral artery runs down, and that's that's a 17-second bleed out. But what I really wanted to talk about was this whole idea of, it's kind of tongue in cheek, of cutting someone just a little bit, right? In the Filipino martial arts, we see knife work, and we're constantly targeting high value um, targets, right? These vital organs. We're targeting the heart, we're targeting the carotid and the subclavian artery, right? We're targeting the brachial artery, we're targeting the femoral artery. We're going for multiple strikes, really focusing in on depth penetration and wound size. And that's cool, I guess. Um, but I'll share with you what I see mostly whenever we see footage of two people engaged in an ego based, consensual, duel, let's call it what it is, whenever you see these machete fights, right, in South America, Southeast Asia, Africa, whenever you see two people mutually engaged in edged weapons combat, um, I've rarely, although I have, but I rarely see that engagement terminate into death. Typically, what would happen is somebody would get the best out of somebody, right? They'd cut them just a little bit, right? It could be a superficial cut that produces a lot of blood, for example, like when you get cut in, you know, parts of your arm, right? Or in your chest where it doesn't penetrate and hit vital organs. Usually the sight of blood is like, okay, well, this fight's over, right? And typically whenever you see these knife fights, there's a crowd, right? There are active bystanders, either or passive bystanders, which sometimes include law enforcement, and they're just not getting in there until this ego-based clash reaches some kind of a temporary finality. Somebody gets cut, and then boom, that's the end of that. But there's a danger in when we talk about shooting someone in the leg or cutting someone just a little bit, because then just like with these ego-based engagements, right? Was it necessitated to begin with? Are you going to be able to articulate a lawful self-defense case when um, there is some level of consent to it? Anyway, that's what I was thinking about. But I read a quote from I believe it was Matt Thornton, and I think it's a really beautiful quote that it's something that I believe in. But again, it's really hard to navigate the nuance because it's really easy to misconstrue what the message is, right? So the quote goes, "Not every encounter warranting force requires extreme malice in its application. A large part of functional martial arts is the ability to react appropriately and regulate force accordingly." So he's a jujitsu practitioner. By the way, jujitsu, I believe, it's tremendous asset to law enforcement. Huge asset to law enforcement. But when it comes to knife work, what can we do as Filipino martial artists to regulate force when our force option is typically edged weapons, right? Um, I know already people are saying, okay, well, Filipino martial arts has empty hand work, but being completely honest, it's almost like an afterthought the way it's treated in Filipino martial arts, and it certainly isn't a specialty in Filipino martial arts. Not to say that it's not focused on by some groups, because it is. But what do we think about the idea of, even in a self-defense situation, cutting somebody just a little bit, just enough to produce a psychological stop, or even some kind of a psychological neutralization of malicious intent? I mean, to say somebody's hell bent on attacking us for whatever reason, right? We produce a weapon. We use that weapon to neutralize that intention without necessarily targeting vital organs. I wonder how well that will hold up in a court of law. It's very interesting. You won't bleed out in 30 seconds, says Pedro Wagon. Rather, you can lose consciousness in 30 to 50 seconds from an arterial wound, then proceed to bleed out within 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, I see what you mean. Like literally bleeding out. Yes, sure, I get it. Like you won't be dead in 30 seconds, but yeah, you lose consciousness, which is as good as dead. To my knowledge, continuum of force models vary with the job, position, environment. Absolutely true. a Canadian citizen may not be able to legally use a weapon and may have to follow a different continuum, as to say, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the self-defense laws in Canada are a little bit uh some parts of it is really ridiculous, right? There are some interpretations where we are technically not even allowed to defend ourselves or our property. It's very, very interesting. Um, and even the use of edged weapons in an actual self-defense, legally court justifiable self-defense, it would really require very specific conditions, extenuating circumstances, so to speak, where you can prove you were in the legal right to defend yourself using freaking lethal force, and what lethal force options you used, the conditions of, why did you have it, how was it produced, was it your weapon, was it their weapon, was it a weapon of opportunity. It's very weird. Attack the weapon hand, defang the snake. What do you think? Well, that's a part of the discussion. I actually had a comment on one of my videos, and I mean, addressing internet commentary is sometimes ridiculous, right? But yes, defanging the snake is absolutely a part of that matrix. The thing about defanging the snake when it comes to knife, there's a lot of people that have, and these people typically don't spar competitively. And I know sparring isn't the be all end all, but it's really a great way to test out what defanging the snake can really mean when two people have two short edged weapons. I don't care who you are, it's a 50-50 proposition. I work on it quite a bit. And even then, when two hands are swinging towards each other with edged weapons, it is a crapshoot. Anyone who says that they have this ability to defang the snake on command is just absolutely full of shit, and they haven't tested against enough people to include untrained energy to really, you know, to really know how unreliable that moment in time is. And I don't care who you are. You can be a Filipino martial arts master, and I'll put you up against a tennis player, an average high school student. You guys can both have AccuStrike training knives, and you go ahead and try to defang the snake. It's a 50-50 proposition at best. It's just moving way too fast. Those weapons can be oriented in so many different ways, and just the unpredictable nature of how somebody untrained might attack you with a knife. It's insane. It's insane. It's absolutely insane how people believe that they can just defang the snake on command. It's ridiculous. But it is part of the matrix, right? Cutting somebody in the hand isn't for sure going to be a lethal cut, right? You can have these mechanical cuts where you render limbs useless. But again, it's any cut that is, superficial in nature, but produces the psychological effect. Like, heck, I'm talking about, a higher percentage, I think, than defanging the snake is just stabbing somebody in the face, right? You just got to be careful with certain parts, right? But if you stab somebody in the face, that's a major psychological stimuli that no human being is able to just going to be, just shake it off and I got stabbed in the face. Let's keep going. Differentiating, of course, a thrust with a slash, because you can certainly get slashed in the face and not even really know it, right? Depending on the integrity, sharpness of that blade. Not sure if current, but the Canadian Armed Forces model I'm familiar with is a 5-level system from verbal for the compliant, hands on. Yeah, I'm not sure either, to be honest, man. But that force continuum, uh, it's a really good visual model, particularly when that continuum uses instead of like blocks of color, gradients, right? Because there's a lot where one kind of bleeds into the next. Yeah, but it's interesting. I do like the idea. Let's say we lived in Texas or Florida, right? I think it's going to be a lot easier than if we were in Canada, for example, to justify the use of edged weapons in a semi self-defense condition. I don't even know what to call it, because the standards differ. Anyway, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. And how can we formulate our training to that end? Should we even consider that in training? I think so. I think it's responsible to do that. And also the way in which, Filipino martial arts concepts are traditionally trained. And this is due in large part to not having access to safe training tools, right? Training knives, things like that. It had to be the intensity needed to be diminished, like the competition needed to be broken down. Which reminds me, there's another friggin' great quote, just a stellar quote from Guru Mark Denny, which I just love. I fell in love with this quote, man, and it's a really, really important quote. It goes like this: we need to remember that these Filipino martial arts training methods were developed by warriors in the Philippines to train well and safely. One more time. The direct quote is, but most of all, we need to remember that these training methods were developed by warriors in the Philippines to train well and safely. Here in the United States, we try to use them to develop warriors, which is an entirely different task, and blame the methods instead of ourselves when we still can't fight. I love that quote. Love that quote from Guru Mark Denny. It makes so much sense. And it makes sense considering that he is the founder of Dog Brothers Martial Arts and a co-founder of the Dog Brothers. What he's saying with that quote is that these Filipino martial arts training methods won't make you into a warrior. That's not what they were designed for. They were used by warriors to continue to train safely and reliably. And I think that's a powerful, powerful quote, because so much of Filipino martial arts training is centered around this idea that if we train like warriors, we are warriors, and that's just absolutely not the case. I hesitate to use the term warrior as loosely as some people, right? Um, and I get it, somebody who has a long battle with cancer and wins, is that person a warrior? I certainly would not deny them that title, right? Um, uh, any person who goes through adversity, whether it's poverty, or they come from a war-torn country, or just has had a bad go at life, right? Somebody wants to call that person a warrior, cool, right? If a child battles through a terminal illness, uh, is that child a warrior? I will never deny them that title. Um, but for me, a warrior is, it's the definition is pretty strict for me, right? And that's somebody who fights in a war. That's a warrior. Uh, and so when it comes to the Filipino martial arts, again, going back to this Mark Denny quote, that the training methods contained within the Filipino martial arts were used by warriors in the Philippines to train safely. So they were already warriors. And I think the closest that we can get to that as Filipino martial artists, honestly, is to manufacture adversity through competition. And just, it's really humbling, right? It's a really humbling and worthwhile pursuit to go full contact or real contact with somebody who's actively, like, really trying to hit you. I saw a video today, just browsing through my Facebook feed, of somebody, claiming to be sparring. And I know sparring takes on many different forms and amplitudes, platforms. But I think what can't be removed from any sparring platform is um, honest competitive energy, right? Um, or honest competitive intention. When I'm actually trying to hit somebody, I don't need to hit them with full force and bad intention, but I'm actually trying to hit that person. And I think a lot of what is considered sparring in Filipino martial arts isn't that, you know. But in any case, let's go back here. Scenario based is probably the way to go. Do they have a weapon, multiple attackers for a decision to draw, panantukan for combatives? Yeah, we can talk about scenario based training for Filipino martial arts. I think that for the most part, scenario training is a huge waste of time and resources. I think also that we will never be able to dictate or predict the exact conditions and parameters when we hopefully never get tested, right, in real life. But there are just so many variables to manage that unless you're in a particular line of work, conducting scenario based training for Filipino martial arts for knife work is a big waste of time. Um, so let's talk about some scenarios, right? Okay, we can conduct scenario training. Okay, let's say we are in a bus. We're sitting on the bus, and there's a knife attacker on the bus. Or what if we were in a restaurant and somebody enters the restaurant? There are just too many variables. What kind of chairs do we have? How many people are in there? Is the bus moving? How crowded is the bus? There are just too many extenuating variables and factors that can't be controlled, that actually attempting scenario based training for knife work it's useless. I mean, what I'm getting at here is that there are certain commonly occurring conditions that we can recreate with minimal resources in a way that's safe and repeatable, right? Micro scenario training, not full blown scenario training. And I think what's also, man, you got me started on, like, bullshit scenario based training that people conduct, right? Because here's how most people get scenario training wrong, is that the action is going to be forced. It's going to be linear. You walk into a room, there's multiple attackers, and they're definitely going to attack you. There isn't a whole lot of room for active de-escalation where what you say and how you say it in the sequence that you say it may actually play a role in de-escalating. A lot of de-escalation in scenario-based training is just a check mark. Like, put the gun down, hey bro, I don't want to do this, and then boom, they automatically throw hands. There is never, I shouldn't say it's never, that's a lie. But unless you create a scenario condition where it's non-linear, it's completely dynamic, and what you say and what you do has an actual effect and outcome on what ends up going down. And it's not just a checklist where no matter how much I de-escalate, no matter how I maneuver myself in this manufactured environment, we're always going to fight. That's not how scenarios go. You might as well just continue to work on the skill sets that you're going to utilize in the scenario. The scenario is oftentimes just like this pile of shit that you throw on that just makes things like really complex and unnecessarily inefficient. Where, hey, if we're going to throw down anyway, if my words and my actions have no bearing on the outcome of this scenario, why don't we just continue to work on the skills? Let's just continue to grapple. Let's just continue to strike. Let's just continue to spar. Wrapping this scenario is senseless. So that's what I think. But yeah, micro scenario training is attainable, it's repeatable, and then you can look at specific parameters, right? Instead of the actual scenario, like a bus, a fuselage, a hallway, all have a common factor, right? These are closed in areas, right? So by doing micro scenarios, you're not saying, okay, I'm in a bathroom stall, now I'm in a waiting room, now I'm in a bus. We're just learning how to navigate the specific characteristics of closed in areas. And then we don't have to go through the full thing. To do scenario training well requires a lot of resources. And the one thing that people typically skimp out on is training role players appropriately, training role players to understand the dynamics of human interaction, but also having the capability to back that up with skills, right? And what I mean by that is, you get a big, tough guy as a role player in your scenario, and, no matter what, he's going to just hit you with all he's got. You're not really learning anything, right? Maybe you're testing, but then again, why not just keep training, keep fighting? Have the training audience leave the room, assign roles to the beating dummies. Yeah, maybe you talk about micro scenarios. Is the scenario-based training a decision-making exercise separate from technical and timing? No. Well, when scenario-based training is done right, it encompasses all of those things. It encompasses all of those things, and in a non-linear fashion, right? It's evolving, but again, it's very difficult because you need good role players, and oftentimes, good role players for scenarios are really hard to come by. Really hard to come by, because a good role player will understand exactly what the instructor or the system is trying to teach, have the physical skills to back that up, and be able to regulate that physicality through really enough experience so that it's not creating an actual dangerous environment for participants. They need to be able to juggle so much, and that's why good role players, they are hard to find, and I don't think there are enough role playing tutorials. I don't even know what to call it. I was, and I still am, involved in creating a module on how to create good role players. For those of you guys who don't know, I come from, an improv acting background. I studied theater a little bit, And that's what's required, right? Um, I know it kind of sounds floofy that, but really, to to be a good role player, you need to be able to manifest and project real intention and emotion. Um, the emotional gravity of a scenario is as important as the actual physical stuff that happens, right? So you can't have a role player who's just, I mean, yeah, you know, who's telling you to fuck off, but he's kind of like laughing through it, right? So emotional gravity and scenario training is, it's like the last frontier, man. It's often overlooked, and it's probably the most important element in scenario based training. Anyway, this has gone on long enough. What I really wanted to talk about was this whole idea of um, using lethal force tools for non lethal intentions, which I haven't really done a very good job of actually answering. Yeah. Cool. Well, if there isn't anything else, uh, what is this? Oh, okay. All right. I think that's it. You're welcome. I don't think I did a very good job um, necessarily breaking it down. Although I will say this, right? Um, again, somebody else commented on one of my training videos, and I, man, when it comes to knife defense, when it comes to integrating the bladed arts, it's really important for us not to be one dimensional or to subscribe to a set of tactics that some guru, some master instilled in you. And even if you find that these tactics and philosophies produce reliable results in pressure testing, I don't think it's a good idea. Like I'll give you an example. In Pikiti Tersha, we have this concept of sabayan, and sabayan means, at the same time, and it's this whole philosophical idea of a simultaneous defense and attack, right? um, and so, this concept manifests in all combat sports, right? If I'm going to parry and launch a counterattack at the same time, this is why you see a whole lot of these kind of postures, like even in silat, right, where this is a defense and this is the uh, counter offense. This idea of defending and attacking at the same time, it's a brilliant idea. But uh, if you subscribe to that philosophy as the only possible option, it's I think it's dangerous. I think you always want to leave room for decision making, right? Uh, I think a lot of folks who train with edged weapons do so under the framework of things being in black and white, right? Like if I have my knife out, they have their knife out, I definitely need to end this person's life. I don't subscribe to that at all. Um, and so, yeah, do I believe in the concept of sabaya and the concept of a simultaneous attack and defense? Yes, I do. Do I also believe that training methodologies where it's sort of give and take produces value? Absolutely. That give and take dynamics, it could be seen as an incorrect approach to knife work, right? Because I strike, then you strike, like this whole sombrada idea: your turn, my turn, offense, defense, offense, defense. And people often tout these kinds of practices as having the potential to develop bad habits. I just don't think humans are that stupid. And one of the analogies I like to use: if humans are so dumb and they develop bad habits, if you look at people who like drive in those destruction derbies. You guys know what I'm talking about? Or like a monster truck rally, right? Where the idea is to take my car and to ram it into another car and destroy that car. I don't think these people drive that way when they're out on the road, right? People whose lives are completely surrounded by destroying vehicles with their vehicle. I don't think that they go out on the road and drive that way. And so when we mix up and add variety to Filipino martial arts training, to include the idea of simultaneous attack and defense, to include targeting high value areas to be able to neutralize the threat very, very quickly, to include a give and take element, to include micro scenario training, to include sparring, right? I think by doing a variety of training methodologies and being critical about, where the benefits begin and end, I think that's the way to go. And whenever we have disagreements about training methodologies, like, look, I find value in practically every element of FMA training. And I think that sometimes gets me in trouble is because people don't like when I say that, okay, that drill is good for this, but not good for this. Or I don't think that drill is doing what you think it's doing for you. The flip side of that is I can find value in every Filipino martial arts practice, even WECAF sparring, where it literally looks like two electric fans just wailing away at each other. Like WECAF fighting, the training for that requires tremendous strike endurance and resilience. Not resilience, no, strike endurance, high frequency striking in WECAF. That develops amazing attributes. Now, when they get into a machete fight, does that mean that they're gonna just like boo boo boo, like we tick the crap out of their attacker? No, I don't think so. But that's what, when people criticize WECAF fighting as being not realistic or combative enough, I'm like, it's not supposed to. And when they go, well, they're going to develop bad habits, I'm like, I don't think that's how humans work, man. And so I sometimes get in trouble when, or people don't like me when I express the limitations of a drill. But the truth is, all drills and practices have inherent limitations. And I'm sorry if you thought you were developing timing. I'll give you an idea, right? Some people can do drills with their eyes closed, and they go, "It helps me with my timing." I'm like, how can it help you with your timing if the primary tools you use for timing, right, is gone? I don't get that. It's just all like parlor tricks, right? When people say something develops their sensitivity, but they're detached from their opponent, I'm like, how are you developing tactile sensitivity when you're not touching your opponent? Anyway, a whole lot of crap in Filipino martial arts, and it's good. I mean, man, here I go again. I'm going to get in trouble for saying there's a whole lot of crap in Filipino martial arts. What I mean by that is there's a point of diminishing returns for every element of Filipino martial arts training. And the more we are honest about how a particular set of practice improves us, and we don't have these false illusions about what they're doing, I think we can go on with our day and explore, options to fill that gap. I hope that makes sense. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. No, I appreciate you guys. This was awesome. Learned a lot. I appreciate what you do for the arts. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate what the arts do for me, to be honest. It's super rewarding. Yeah, super awesome. All right. Cool. You know what we didn't do today? We didn't play the awesomest intro ever. Maybe we'll do that now. All right. Have a great day.
fuck out of bed, bitch. Go.